This morning's scripture reading actually is a continuation of the story that we looked at last week, where the resurrected Jesus had appeared to the disciples who were out fishing. They came to shore and they had breakfast with Jesus. And then there's an interaction between Simon Peter and Jesus. And that's where we're going to begin with John chapter 21, beginning with verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." The story is told of a young man who was appointed the presidency at a bank at the age of just 32. Now, becoming president of the bank was a goal that this young man had, but he never dreamed that he would ever accomplish it by the age of 32. So he was excited, but also fearful about this new position. And so as he began to start his job, he thought, I need to go and get some advice for what it means to be a good president of a bank. And so he went to the former president of the bank to seek some advice. And as he went to this older man, he said, "What do I need to do to be a good president of the bank?" And the older man said, "Well, make right decisions." Well, the young president was okay with that advice, but he wanted a little more detail. He wanted to be told a little more about how he could be successful. And so he said, "Well, how can I make right decisions?" The man answered, "Well, experience." Well, at that point, the young president was pretty frustrated. But he said, "That's why I'm coming to you." He said, "I'm young, I'm inexperienced, I'm not sure how to go about this. How would you suggest that I should get experience with making right decisions?" And he said, "Wrong decisions." Now, none of us set out in the course of a day planning to make wrong decisions. We don't plan on setting out in a day and making mistakes and messing up. But those things happen in each and every one of our lives. A few years ago, there was a song that got a lot of playtime on Christian radio. I don't know the name of the song. I don't know the artist that sang the song. But it's one that the more I listened to it, the more it kind of gripped me. It was the story about a young man who was searching for meaning in life. He was trying to search out how to live right, how to live in a righteous way. And in that process, he would go down to a monastery that was in his town, and he would stand outside the wall of that monastery. It was an iron wall all the way around it with a big iron gate. And he would look through that fence and would look in at the monks that were out there walking around, saying their prayers. Their life seemed to be so easy. It seemed to be so peaceful. It seemed to be so good. And one day, as he was standing there by the fence, one of the monks came up and talked to him. And as this young man talked to him, he said, "How is it that you can live such a holy and righteous life?" And the monk said, "It's not as easy inside this fence as you think it might be." He said, "We still fall down. We still trip and fall. We still struggle with sins in our life." But he said, "A saint is just a sinner who falls down and gets up." As Christians, we're going to blow it. There are going to be times when we mess up. We're going to sin from time to time. It's not something that we get up in the course of a day and say, I'm going to be about sinning today. We don't do it intentionally, but yet, because of the world in which we live, because of the temptations and challenges that we face, there are going to be times we fall. There are going to be times we mess up. If we look at the life of Peter, if we look through the Scriptures, we find that Peter is a leader among the disciples. He was a part of Jesus' inner circle. As we look at Scripture, we see that on the day of Pentecost, Peter was the first preacher. He was one that under his preaching, thousands of people decided to follow Jesus. But if we would look at what the Scripture tells us about Peter from the night that Jesus was arrested, actually until the story we read today, we find a Peter who is struggling. We find one who was so confident that he would follow Jesus to the end and do anything it took, even be willing to give his life to be faithful to Jesus. And yet we know that when he was arrested on that night, he denied even knowing Jesus. He denied him 3 times. Peter is trying to figure out how to put his life back together. Peter has fallen down and he's struggling with getting back up. Peter's trying to make sense of it all and how to put life back together. And at the beginning of chapter 1, it's recorded that Peter says that I'm going out fishing. We talked about that story last week. He was going to something that was familiar for him. I believe that Peter went fishing in order to get away from the struggles and the guilt and get his mind off the recent events that had happened that he experienced in recent days. But we talked about this fishing trip last week, and after the disciples were on shore and ate breakfast with Jesus, then Jesus asked Peter 3 questions. Now, this part of Scripture is often referred to as the reinstatement of Peter. But I like to call it Peter's recommitment. Jesus said to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" Now, the first thing I want you to notice about this verse is that Jesus called Peter Simon. Jesus was the one that had given Simon the name Peter because he said, "Peter, you are the rock on which my church is going to be built." When Jesus changed Simon's name to Peter, it was showing that he was going to be a leader. He was going to be the foundation. He was going to be the stronghold. But now Jesus doesn't refer to him as Peter the rock, but rather refers to him as Simon. He calls him by the same name that he called him on that day that he invited him to first be a disciple. When Jesus called Peter Simon, Peter knew that his relationship with Jesus was different. His relationship was different than it had been a few weeks earlier. And maybe it wasn't that Peter's relationship with Jesus was so different, but Peter knew that he was different than he had been just a few weeks earlier. Now encountering Jesus face to face must have made the weight and the guilt of failure and denial even heavier on his heart.